Our topic today is the proposal for the Broadway Edgewater rezoning redevelopment project. Several of you live in the area, as well as many of us enjoy the area for their great restaurants and interesting shops that they have in that area. So unique and vibrant neighborhood. It has gotten a lot of news coverage, including even today in Chicago Tribune's opinion page. So you probably know something about it already. I don't.
Oh, you're at the right place.
Well, then you're in the right place.
That's why I'm here.
Today's featured speaker is Jim Shunk. Jim is president of the Lakewood Balmoral Residents Council and the Edgewater Local Association. He is a resident of the area included in the proposal. You hear a lot from the news sources, but we wanted to bring you the perspective of the residents of the affected area and how they view the plan. I ask that you keep your questions until after Jim's presentation, when we will have a question and answer period. We're happy to have representatives of Ward 46 and 48 with us today. Agnes Chan. Agnes, could you stand up so we all know who you are?
Recording in progress.
Agnes is a 48th Ward Director of Development and Infrastructure, so she should know a lot about the plan. And we're also joined by Jesse Orr. Would you stand up? Jesse is the 46th Ward Director of Development and Infrastructure. So save your questions for later after the presentation. And the Alderman's representatives are here to answer questions during the Q&A. So if you have some for them, that's the time to bring it up. Okay, please welcome our speaker, Jim Shunk.
As Fran said, I'm a resident of the 48th Ward. We have the Edgewater neighborhood. My neighborhood is a kind of a little carve out of Edgewater in Andersonville. It's called Lakewood Balmoral. That's because it's a 3-block by 4-block rectangle between Edgewater and Andersonville. And it centers on Lakewood and Balmoral. What a surprise. It's a National Historic neighborhood. Most of the homes in our neighborhood are over 100 years old. The one that my wife and I and my mother and my daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren live in was built in 1908. So we take part responsibility for the Cubs World Series victory in 2016, because that was the last year the Cubs had won the World Series. This is a great topic, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to it. As Fran said, this is in the news seemingly every day now. Yesterday there was a great article in the Tribune called "More Housing Density on the Tony North Shore Remains Elusive in Practice." And the first sentence was great. It said, "The Chicago area has a housing affordability and availability problem." Okay? And I think that's probably a true statement that most of us would agree with. So that the context, that kind of sets the context for our topic this afternoon. There is a housing shortage. Many who are successful enough to afford to live there, that is on the North Shore, would prefer it stay as it is. Striking that delicate balance between preservation and dynamism is hard, and it's not a science. I think that's really at the crux of this issue is balance. How do you balance the needs of people to live in the city and to be able to afford to live in the city with the property rights of those people who already do? Chicago's not the only place struggling with this. You know, the article was written about Evanston and Highland Park. But then today, I get up and I'm reading the paper with my cup of coffee, and here is an article, and I'll pass these around, an article written by Pat Sharkey, or an opinion. It's on the opinion page. Pat is a resident of Edgewater. She is the president of another one of the neighborhood associations in Edgewater. She is kind of the founder of a coalition of neighborhood associations in Edgewater. And she and some of our fellow residents have formed a collaboration called Edgewater Residents for Responsible Development. This is a mover and a shaker. I think she's trained as a lawyer, has been a lawyer for many years. She is able to express herself very well. So I will pass this article around to you as well, because she's much more capable, I think, than I of explaining what the issues are. But she's not here today, so I'll try to pick up on what she would say as well as what others would say. So for those of you that don't know what the heck we're talking about, we're talking about a proposal by 3 aldermen in Chicago, 2 of whom are represented here today, which is great. And they are proposing that a 2.6 mile stretch of Broadway Avenue from, I think it's Montrose in the south to Devon in the north, be both sides of Broadway be upzoned, meaning changing the zoning regulations. Right now, most of that strip is zoned so that 4 to 5 level buildings are, can be built there and developed there. Currently, most of it is called B12, and I'll try not to focus too much on these numbers, but they're proposing that most of it be changed to B35. Okay, not all of it, but most of it. And the B, I think, means business, whereas if you see a zoning regulation and it says R, that means residential, okay? But most of that Broadway strip is business. Our neighborhood only butts up against the west side of Broadway for 4 blocks. Okay, so we're a small little neighborhood in that 2.6 mile corridor, just 4 blocks of that. And we have about 1,400 residents in about 400 homes. And again, most of them are single family, older, beautiful homes. If you're not familiar with our neighborhood, take your dog for a walk through our neighborhood. It's stunning. It's beautiful. So what they're proposing is that the zoning be changed along that 2.6 miles so that they can build bigger buildings, okay, that can house more people, that they can offer more affordable apartments for people to rent, et cetera, okay? That's what the Broadway land use plan that they submitted is trying to accomplish. Okay, and how can you argue against accessibility and affordability? How can, come on. Well, unless you live there, all right? Now again, there are I want to mention a couple other things that are going on in parallel with this that have most of our residents very concerned about. And I'll try not to use the word angry, but there's a lot of angst, and unfortunately there's developed a lot of acrimony as well around this proposal. A couple things that are going on in parallel. Our Alderwoman, Lenny Mana'a Hoppenworth, in the 48th Ward, has made the 48th Ward what is referred to as a low affordability community, okay? Which our understanding is this will allow developers, new developers in the 48th Ward, to pay lower real estate taxes for many years up front. That's one of the means they would use to attract developers, okay? And I don't know how much you know about property taxes in Chicago. I've only lived here a few years, but I know enough to know it's a win-lose situation. In other words, if you pay less, I pay more, okay? Because it's split between all of us. And if Dan, Dave, Fran pay more, I get to pay, or I'm gonna pay less, they have to pay more. Another thing that's going on is that the City Council of Chicago recently approved eliminating parking requirements for new developments in what is called a transit-oriented development, or TOD. Now, we are fortunate in the 48th Ward. We just got a new L, right? New L train tracks. We got 4 new stations that are handicapped accessible. I think it's like a $2 billion project. Okay, it's been going on for 5 years, and most of it is completed now. It's great. It's wonderful. It's such a big improvement. Okay, so they're logically, commonsensically trying to draw more affordable and accessible housing into that area that is attached to the L or is close to the L, so that we can use they can use mass transit, right? Which is going to be the way it is sometime in the future. We won't own cars. You know, our grandkids probably won't own cars in Chicago. So that's a step in the right direction as well. So what's all the concern about? What's the big deal? Okay, these are all great objectives. You know, I think here are the concerns now of our residents. I can't speak for residents outside of my neighborhood. I've only been the president of the association for 2 months, okay? Right in the middle of this. Like, great timing. In our case, the concern, first of all, is the height and the density of the buildings on the west side of Broadway. Everyone I've spoken to in our neighborhood has said, the east side, great, let them build 6, 7, 8-story buildings, okay? On the east side, those building lots are deeper, they back up to the L. How perfect. Build your big ass building on the east side, but don't put those buildings on the west side where our homes butt up against them. Our backyards literally are across the alley from these potentially bigger buildings.
With the smaller lots.
On a smaller lot, okay? So these buildings will be, relatively close to the alley. They could be, 6, 7, 8 stories high. So you go out in your backyard and you don't see the sun for half the day, okay? That's one concern, is the height of those buildings that are probably will be built someday, and probably should be, but not now. Maybe 100 years from now, but not now, okay? So that's one concern. Another concern is the alley itself. Again, we back up to that alley, and right now it's a problem. I mean, the trucks that go in there, the delivery trucks, they block access to the alley. Many of our residents have garages that you can only access from the alleyway. And so they're very concerned about what's going to happen to access through that alley. Another concern is parking. If you build a bunch of big buildings on Broadway and you don't require them to provide parking, where are those people going to park their cars? And don't tell me most, if not all of them. Some of them are going to have cars. Maybe most of them are going to have cars. Maybe they're renting where they are because of the access to mass transit. Maybe not. There are, lots of statistics available about how many people own cars, okay? If you build housing for 10,000 additional people, Don't tell me there aren't gonna be 4,000 or 5,000 more cars in that area. And if you don't require the developers or builders to provide parking, where are they gonna park? Well, I'll tell you where they're gonna park. They're gonna park where they park now, which is in our neighborhood. And in the neighborhoods that butt up against Broadway. We have for many years been able to avoid having permit parking. On my street, my block of Wayne Avenue, there are probably half of the cars that are parked out there every day are from people who don't live on our block. Okay, they live in condominiums and apartment buildings that are around the corner, whatever, and they park as near to their places they can. It's common sense, and they park in our neighborhood. Well, that's fine, unless, as a resident, you want to park on your own street, or you have guests that are coming over, or you own more than one car and you have a one-car garage. Parking, we're afraid, is going to be a huge issue, okay? And that is because our city council, this is not just our 3 aldermen or alderwomen in our area, but the city council at large voted that in about a month ago, or dropped that requirement, okay? Another big concern that people have, and you'll see it in Pat Sharkey's article that's going around, is impact on small businesses. That they're afraid that the small businesses that are on Broadway now won't be able to afford to stay there. Once you put up a brand new, shiny new building, rents typically go up. They don't go down, they go up. Understandably, that's common sense. Many of these businesses, we're told, are fearful that they won't be able to afford to stay there. So, if you're looking at this from a resident standpoint, you're going, great, I'm gonna have this big building up against the back of my house, or my yard, across the alley. There's gonna be a lot more people in the area because of the density. There are gonna be fewer small businesses. People are gonna be parking in my street. I won't be able to find a parking lot or a parking space. There's gonna be more noise. There's gonna be more traffic. Why? Okay. Why go this far? People also wouldn't be as up in arms if this process, I think, had been done, we think had been done correctly, and a lot more time put into the planning. What they've done, and I think Pat says this very well, is they've proposed, with a few exceptions, pretty much it's going to be this way the whole side. Both sides of Broadway for all 2.6 miles, rather than looking at it. And maybe they did, I know Agnes, I've met with Agnes. Agnes is, twice as smart as I am. She's a UCLA graduate, so she's got to be smart, okay? She's, I'm sure, very good at what she does, and she might very well have sat and looked at every building on Broadway for 2.6 miles, for all I know, okay? But when we look at it and we go, shouldn't be the same way on both sides. In our neighborhood, we have a lot of lawyers and a lot of realtors live in our neighborhood, okay? That's a dangerous combination, very dangerous. Some of them have done a lot of research on density in our area, affordability, what happens when you build tall buildings, what happens with the rent, does it go up, does it go down, do they build family units, or do they build studio units and 1-bedroom apartments, because they can make more money that way, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that these people who are more knowledgeable than me have said is that Edgewater already has good affordable housing. It already is relatively dense. If you make this change, you also will create the only place in the city of Chicago, which is, we all know, is huge. It'll be the only place in Chicago where a B3/5 butts up against a residential area, which is zoned as what? Just so I try to get this right. Maybe I didn't write this down. But our residential area is like a RS12 or something like that. There's no other place in Chicago where you would put a B35 up against that kind of zoning. No other place in Chicago. What you should do is try to transition, right? You don't want this up against that. You transition. So from a technical standpoint and aesthetic standpoint, they're also concerned about that. So we have had, Lenny was gracious enough, our alderwoman, to come to a meeting in January of this year. We had 200 people show up with 2 days' notice from our neighborhood. They were pissed, okay? And I can say that because I moderated the meeting. I wasn't just there, I made sure they got out alive, okay? And most people were very civil and respectful. I only had to call my neighbors on it a couple of times, please keep it civil. But people are not happy with this at all. We have submitted 2 petitions signed by over 200 residents of our neighborhood. We have filed an official protest with the zoning committee. We have donated money, residents from our neighborhood, to the hiring of a lawyer to potentially sue the city if this change goes through or is voted on. It's going to be voted on in mid-October, by the way. The voting has been delayed at least twice, primarily because the way I interpret it is the Department of Planning screwed up and they didn't get the notices out correctly. Okay, when you're going to change zoning, it's a big deal. Okay, it is a big deal. And so there are rules and regulations about notification of residents and businesses so that they can be aware of what's happening. Okay, and the Department of Planning evidently screwed that up and didn't get those out right, and so they've had to delay the vote. But it's coming up in mid-October. One thing that, to be fair, that our alderwoman has done is she did make an exception for 2 of the 4 blocks of our neighborhood. I told you that we have 4 blocks that butt up against Broadway. The 2 southern blocks, she has submitted an exception to the overall plan to make those B33, which could potentially downsize the maximum height of the buildings, okay? And I did write these down. Again, currently most of Broadway is B12, okay? So we get like 4-story buildings out of that. With the changes that are proposed to the zoning, it would allow developments basically to double in size, okay? From under 50 feet high to 65 feet to 80 feet. And due to the proximity of the L, B33 can also go to 75 feet. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of floors, I think, like how tall is a floor? I don't know, 10 feet, 12 feet, something like that, somewhere in that range. So if you have an 80-foot building, you're talking about at least 6 or 7 stories, as opposed, or maybe even 8, as opposed to 3 or 4, which most of them are now. So there's that balance. So we're concerned about the west side of Broadway. We're concerned about the height. We're concerned about the parking. We're concerned about the process to get here, which normally these processes take more time and there's more community participation before something is submitted to the zoning committee and to the city council for approval. We're upset about all of those things, okay? If these changes go through, we will do our best as residents to work with our older persons to see that the change that does go through and the developments that are under consideration take into account our property rights, okay? And what's important to us, and not just the great objectives of accessibility and affordability. So something to this effect was attempted about 20 years ago as well. And I didn't live in Chicago, certainly didn't live in the neighborhood, but I know the people who were here in our neighborhood who were part of the LBRC at the time, and they fought tooth and nail, and the perception was that our older person was more receptive to our input, okay, and listened better, and took that more into consideration. So, almost done. This is a big deal. Potential positive big deal for the city of Chicago and its residents, and a big deal for adversely affecting neighborhoods in that area and current property owners. So it is a big deal, and I appreciate the fact that you all recognize it enough to have this be the topic of your meeting. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If you have a question, just raise your hand. I saw Susan first.
Ladies first. The doctor is first. His hand is up first. Dr. Bill.
What does Lenny say?
What does Lenny say about the change or the proposal? Well, the perception is that she was one of the primary drivers of it, okay? She has said and will say, and I think this is a direct quote, the idea is to provide consistent, transparent, and predictable zoning, okay? And it might very well accomplish that, okay? And that would attract developers, okay? So that's what she will say. That's what she has said. Again, she had the courage to come and stand before 200 of us back in January, I think of January or early February, something like that. And the meeting lasted, I don't know, an hour and a half, something like that. And the perception was she listened, but she didn't hear. Okay, now whether that's fair or not, I don't know. So.
I want to remind the people that are listening on Zoom, if you have a question for Jim, please use your reaction button on your Zoom screen on the bottom and raise your hand that way, and we'll get to your question. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for coming here.
Can you come closer so that the
Yeah.
microphone can pick you up?
Thanks for coming
Sure.
here. This isn't the first meeting that I've been to on this issue.
Okay.
And what comes to my mind isn't what you're talking about. I want to talk about the overall. What is the projected amount of revenue with this development that's going to bring into the city, which nobody talks about? Number two, when I hear of high rises, I don't hear about greenery, I don't hear about solar, I don't hear about the future when it comes to energy. I hear a step back, and it has to do with climate warming. When I hear about the increase of housing, which is fine,
Yeah.
I think of two things. One is, I've lived in this area. Every time they talk about affordable housing, it's increased the cost, and they go, well, we have affordable housing in each one. Yes, I can name one that's $2,000 instead of $4,000, and they use just bizarre kind of talking that makes no sense, but what they're doing is they're creating and increasing the tax base.
Yeah.
So now I want to talk about the revenue coming in, the revenue going out, and last is, who's going to pay for the increase of residents in this area when it comes to public works? Fire, police, streets and sanitation, and that goes on the backs of us. So without having, oh, and one last thing. When you're talking about the business area, please remind people we're not stupid. People had businesses, and businesses thrived on Broadway. But then COVID hit, and people learned about ordering online. How many coffee houses and restaurants and empty stores do we need in our neighborhood to realize you're not increasing the tax base? So for the folks that are here, the developers are making the money, but we're the ones that are supplementing it. So if you could help balance out that issue of who's really paying for this and how much revenue is coming in, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, great, good comments, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I live in Edgewater. I do not live in a big house. I do not have a car. But I'm concerned because I see this development on Broadway leading to more gentrification. I mean, one thing I love about Edgewater right now is the diversity in income, the diversity in the type of housing. And I have looked at areas like Wicker Park or like Logan Square, and you see, I mean, my question is, are you handing a blank check to the developers? Because what has happened in those neighborhoods, they come in, they build these apartment buildings with micro apartments, not for families. Okay, there may be a few affordable apartments, but they're charging like mega bucks for the rest of them. And it just changes the whole neighborhood. And I mean, are they going to be handed a blank check? Are you going to have any control over, are they building family housing? What they're I mean, they have to charge a lot for their apartments if they're building. It's going to I mean, I think it's going to hurt affordability in the neighborhood. I've seen what's happened in these other neighborhoods. Wicker Park is awful now. It's not like it was. There's no soul to that neighborhood anymore.
Do you have a Zoom question?
We do, but I know
I
it's,
mean, are you going to have any control over what happens once these developers are? I mean, because if the zoning isn't changed, then they have to, anytime they build something, they have to come before the neighborhood. But if it's changed, all of a sudden, there's no control over them anymore.
So
Is there control?
you're asking the alderman's representative, or are you asking Jim?
Well, I say, is there control?
That's for later. That's for
oh,
later.
No, that's all right. This is our Q&A. Dave, you had a question, and we'll come around.
and we have one on
I wanna, well, the way I see it is that this supposed rezoning is an attack on a well-established culture that is unnecessary and unhelpful for the city, on the idea that we're going to increase the tax base. It just, it's a cultural attack, and it's not worth it.
I have two questions. Is it still possible to require any high-rise building built to provide parking spaces for all those cars?
My understanding is that for developments in these transit-oriented developments, it's not required. If they're outside a transit-oriented development, then I would assume the current regulations still are enforced. And I would add to that, I would assume, and this would be more of a question for Jesse and Agnes, and that would be, even if you're in one of those areas and a developer comes in and says, I want to build this building, I would assume that the older person could still say, However, you need to provide some parking. I could be wrong on that, because one of the concerns we have is that how much say does the alderperson and the community really get after the fact when you change the zoning? I have heard every person who has spoken to me about that has said something different. Okay? Every person, you know? And so I don't have a clear understanding of what the process is during that phase of planning.
The other question is, so they do it in that neighborhood, and I'm south of Montrose at Irving Park, and I like my neighborhood on Broadway. I got some favorite places I go there. Is it gonna slip down into my area of, Lakeview and
Don't know.
Lincoln Park if they do that? Is it just opening the
Yeah. One thing,
dam on the river?
one thing that I will add at this point is that I have been led to believe, and I think it makes sense, that this is going to take time. This is going to take a lot of time, right? I mean, developments aren't going to come in probably day one or month one or year one. It's going to take years to see this kind of change. However, the residents of my neighborhood will say, that's probably going to be the case, but I'm going to be living here in 20 years, okay? Or my children are going to be living here, and in my case, my grandchildren are going to be living here. So it's all fine and dandy that it's not going to be, wow, bang in the face kind of change, but it's still going to be significant when it does happen.
I know this is in the talk. They're looking at it already, I'll bet you.
I would just like to know if the historic zoning has any bearing on what your neighborhood could do.
No, it has no effect on it.
It won't.
That is one thing I forgot to mention, and I appreciate your bringing up something close to it. We're also concerned about the historic buildings on Broadway. There are like 40 plus historic buildings on Broadway that are really cool. I was a history major. I love old buildings and old architecture. And people are concerned about what may happen to those buildings, being torn down without some kind of real strong review process of that. But our neighborhood's National Historic label has no bearing on this at all.
Can't stop.
I heard you say, like, on the other side of Broadway, it's okay.
In our opinion.
In your opinion, so the average median price for a single-family home in your neighborhood is $1.4 million. $1.4 million. So it part of the deal in Chicago is we do butt up against each other. You have very poor people. You have high. That's part of the deal. Like, if we want to live in a pastoral, like Shung's there, Wisconsin's there. So you lost me on the other side of the streets, okay? Yeah. Now I'm an art history minor. Like, I believe we're smart enough to figure it out and incorporate all these things. We can have new buildings save so much on energy than having old infrastructure. So there's ways to do all of this.
We agree.
All of this.
We agree.
But to say I don't really want a tall building behind my back, like, you lost me on that.
Okay, well.
Because that's part of the deal of the city and living in, and to protect just a wealthy community, So I also think that we have to think towards our grandchildren. And we're not just a city here first. We're competing against New York, we're competing against Atlanta, Miami, to continue to drive in young people so we can do the things we want to do. If we don't have that, if we're not making a thing that's attractive to young people, they're going to go to these other places that are doing that. So, and there's going to be mistakes. We're human. We're going to do it wrong, and we're going to do it right. So, but it's worthy of a conversation of all. Heaven forbid you have a $1.4 million house and you have poor people living next door. You know, I'm from Detroit. I want no part of that world that segregates itself that way. That's why I came to Chicago, is that it's integrated. So, anyways, that's all I have. It's not really a question, but no one really has had questions but one people. It's all opinions. Nice.
Okay, I'm Donna, and first of all, I said I was a realtor for 9 years, so I have access to the MLS, which realtors do. If you look closely, a lot of the high-end, very high-end properties are not taxed at the same rate as the middle or the lower, and we need to come to grips with that. Like so many other things, there are loopholes. So I need to clarify that with you, and I tried to clarify before, but I'm continuing. Number 2, it's not questioned, there are no questions about needing affordable housing. Because if you look at the number of homeless in Chicago, there are many, and these people need housing. And thirdly, we have 2 representatives from 2 aldermanic offices. I think if you want to make an intelligent decision, you need to see both sides of the equation and make sure you're getting the information from both sides so that it's accurate. Because otherwise, you're taking a binary approach where you're only taking his opinion, and we need to have all people's opinion. Don't you want to make intelligent decisions? And in order to do that, you have 2 people here that can answer some of the questions that have been raised. Let them answer the questions. What are you afraid of? To hear both sides. For Jim, it's helpful, and for the rest of you, it's helpful. So I suggest this. You can close your ears to what I just said, or you can listen and let these 2 people speak as well, so that you get the big picture, so you can make an intelligent decision.
They are here to answer questions, and if you have a question for them, please ask it.
Okay.
My name is Jean. I live in Edgewater, which is the north end. And apropos your question, I would like them to tell us what percentage of this housing is low income and how low. Because when they're saying low income, they're not talking.
We can't even hear you.
I want the older people to say what percentage of these residences will be low income and how low. Because I think you're not talking what you're talking, which would be great. I would love to see low income people here, but they're not going to get a chance. Number 2, what are the older people getting out of this proposal? Why are they proposing this? I want to know, are the realtors making them some sort of really nice offer? I want to know why should you even do this? If you took a class on how to destroy a neighborhood, increase density, increase traffic, and take away the livability of the neighborhood, perfect scenario. Why are they embracing this?
So I think there have been a few questions for us. So I'm going to start with the I've been taking some notes, but I may have missed them. So I'm going to start with just answering a few kind of technical questions. So the question is now about how is affordability defined? So all developments in this zone where there's a property being built that is taking advantage of the new zoning, just like any other property in Chicago, it has to include 20% of its units as affordable. What affordable is, 20% of the units have to be affordable. Now, the way that Chicago defines affordability, and this is pretty common nationwide, is it's called 60% of the area median income. So that's looking at Chicago overall. That's how most cities do it. That's just how Chicago does it. They're kind of clear rules. What that means is someone making 60% of the average household income for a household of 1 person.
It's a median.
Yeah, median. Yep.
Median.
The typical, like a 50. Yeah, 50 like a family in the middle where half households are wealthier and half are poorer. So 60% of the median income right now in Chicago for a 1-person household is around $50,000. For a 2-person household, it's around 56, 57. The way these developments work is that it's affordable to someone at that income on average. Usually what they do in a building where there's going to be more than 6 affordable units, it's a weighted average between 40% AMI and 80% AMI. And, you know, there's ways that you can kind of squiggle that around. You can do a few fewer units and have them be more deeply targeted. So overall, generally what we're looking at is affordable to households making between $30,000 a year and between $70,000 a year. At the very high end, probably realistically more like 60,000. So when we're talking about affordable housing in these kinds of developments, we're normally talking about, you know, people who are on Social Security, people who maybe, you know, someone who works at a coffee shop, they work at Jewel. So we're talking about, you know, people who are working and have an income because the development doesn't have the money to subsidize someone who, you know, is just out of homelessness, but still can't afford, you know, a space of their own in the neighborhood. So that's kind of just, that's what an affordable unit in this context means. Does that make sense to everybody?
Doesn't sound affordable.
How does that relate to single room occupancy or the small little pads that they're putting up all over the place? That, those are the ones that don't need parking supposedly.
And they don't have families.
Yeah, and so for different sizes of apartments, the city has different rent guidelines. So like a studio apartment, the allowed rent you can do for someone making 60% AMI is going to be that amount. They're allowed to charge less, or they're forced to charge less than you would charge for a 1-bedroom, and then of course less than for a 2-bedroom because the size of the apartment is to some extent included. But those are kind of, that's kind of in the, I don't want to get too trapped in the details because there's basically like 10 pages of like for an apartment this size and a household this size. If the household pays the electricity bill or not, then this is the maximum allowed rent. But I'm happy to share a link to that so that, you know, we can kind of share the full information.
Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Agnes?
There's a lot of topics. I think I won't add to that specifically, but I wanted to just make a note that the current zoning along Broadway is this kind of, you know, there's all different kinds of zoning along Broadway, which makes it confusing for current business owners who, we've had multiple business owners say, I want to relocate across the street, but they can't do it because they need a zoning change. Then they have to hire a lawyer, and it's going to cost them additional $20,000 to $50,000 just to move across the street if they wanted to. So that was one of the things that sort of made us think like, well, if we want to keep our businesses here and they wanted to move, they can't. Another thing is that the current zoning, Jim had mentioned, there are a lot of B1-2, which means maybe 4 stories high, maybe a little more with some kind of adjustment to zoning. But if you look at the current, what is currently on Broadway, we're not building to the max, you know, like that's the zoning, and we don't see just blocks of 4 and 5 story, you know, walls of buildings, right? We see 1 story, maybe 2 stories. So people aren't necessarily building to the max when you propose or like have a certain type of zoning. It's just to, you know, what can you build within that, and they're going to look at what the market can handle and
efficient. And since I've been here since '92, I think to build a new place you have to have parking. And I've heard recently that the city is rethinking that because we have this brand new system. We want people to take the train. Like, why are we still thinking cars? It's like 1950s when we should be thinking all these things that we have in our pockets already. You know, it's my take on it. And I don't know if that's true. I've heard that from a friend who works for one of the aldermen. He said there's definitely a shift. I don't know if that is true or not. You know, less parking and more take the train. You know, lower the price of the CTA so people can take that. That's a thing in other cities, to make it free. For older people, but not for younger people. So, and I had one other thing, but I can't think about it. I can't remember what it was, so.
Well, before it gets too late, I would like to move ahead, and I thank the Alderman's representatives for being here and answering our questions.